My family has a rite of passage where we drive down a specific highway. I just found my grandfather's journal, and now I know it's not a tradition, it's a curse. When a boy becomes a man, he takes a journey in my grandfather's car, a cross-country trip, alone, to connect with the past. My grandfather died before I was born, so for me, it was supposed to be a way to connect with the man I never knew, a way to understand my roots. The men in my family have a tradition, a rite of passage, my dad called it, and I don't know if I passed or failed. The inside smells of old vinyl, stale pipe tobacco, and something else. Something faintly metallic and sad, like old blood. There's no GPS, no Bluetooth, no screen of any kind. The air grew cooler, the sunlight dimmed, filtered through the dense needles overhead. Within 10 minutes, I hadn't seen another car. The road was a lonely, empty ribbon unfurling into the wilderness. Just a rumbling engine, a steering wheel the size of a ship's helm, and an old AM/FM radio with a single, crackling speaker in the dash. Now, I think it was a test. The car itself is a relic. A 1968 Ford Falcon, a heavy beast of seafoam green steel and chrome. I set off 2 weeks ago with a worn paper map unfolded on the passenger seat beside me. The first few days were incredible. Just me, the open road, and the ghosts of old rock and roll on the radio. It was the time for me to go through the road. Looking at the map, I saw it, a thin, red line designated a state highway that cut a perfectly straight, 200-mile slash through a vast, dark green patch of national forest. The turnoff was unassuming, just a faded green sign pointing down a 2-lane blacktop that was immediately swallowed by a canopy of ancient, towering pine trees. That's when the radio started acting up. At first, it was just static, the familiar hiss of a signal lost to distance and geography. But then, through the static, a voice crackled to life. I'd heard of it happening in remote areas, radio waves from God know where, trapped in the ionosphere, sometimes bouncing back down in just the right conditions. It was a strange, atmospheric quirk, a cool story to tell later. Then, up ahead, I saw a building. It was an old, dilapidated diner, its sign faded and peeling, its windows boarded up. It looked like it had been abandoned for half a century. As the car drew level with it, the radio crackled again. This time, it was the sound of children laughing, pure, unadulterated joy. And underneath it, the steady, rhythmic creak, creak, creak of a tire swing. I looked at the tree. There was no swing, just a thick, heavy branch, empty against the gray sky. As I drove past, the radio erupted. It wasn't a voice this time. It was playing back moments, memories that had happened in the exact locations I was passing. This entire desolate stretch of highway, it was a recording. And this car, my grandfather's car, was the playback device. It was a cacophony of sound, the clatter of cutlery on ceramic plates, the sizzle of a grill, the low murmur of conversation. I passed an old, collapsed barn, its roof caved in, its timbers rotting. The prayer faded. I put it in reverse, backed up 10 feet. The prayer started again, mid-sentence. I was controlling it. I was scrubbing through the timeline of this place, the radio filled with the frantic, desperate voice of a man praying, begging for mercy, as the sound of a roaring thunderstorm raged around him. The storm wasn't real. The sky above me was a flat, overcast gray, but in the car, I could almost feel the thunder shake my bones. And over it all, the clear, cheerful voice of a waitress asking, "What'll it be, hun?" It was so real, so vibrant, I could almost smell the greasy spoon coffee. It lasted for the 10 seconds it took to pass the diner, and then it vanished, replaced by the familiar hiss of static. It was a news anchor, his voice crisp and urgent, talking about naval blockades and tensions in Cuba. The broadcast lasted for about 30 seconds, then dissolved back into static. Weird. I twisted the dial, but all I got was more hissing. A few miles later, it happened again. A jingle, upbeat and cheerful. For a brand of soda I vaguely remembered my parents talking about, one that hadn't been on shelves since the 70s. I dismissed it as atmospheric bounce, but the broadcasts kept coming, and they started to change. They became more intimate. I heard the hushed, whispered conversation of two young lovers, their words full of nervous excitement. I heard a mother humming a lullaby, a gentle, wordless tune full of so much love it made my chest ache. I heard a heated argument between two men, their voices sharp and angry, though I couldn't make out the words. They weren't broadcasts anymore. They something else. The feeling in the car shifted from curiosity to a low, humming unease. The road stretched on, empty and unchanging. My heart was pounding. That wasn't some physical phenomena. A few miles later, I passed a wide clearing with a single, massive, gnarled oak tree in the center. The realization hit me hard. The radio wasn't picking up random signals from the sky. It was picking them up from the ground, from the road itself. A morbid curiosity, stronger than my fear, took hold. I started to experiment. I slowed the car to a crawl. I stopped the car completely. The initial wonder of it began to curdle into something much darker. The memories weren't all picnics and laughter. They couldn't be. Up ahead, the road curved sharply around a deep, rocky ravine. A rusty, mangled section of guardrail was the only sign of trouble. As I approached, a knot of ice formed in my stomach. I almost turned the radio off. I couldn't. The static gave way to the screech of tires on wet pavement. It was a horrifying, high-pitched squeal of rubber losing its grip. It was followed by a single, sharp female scream, a sound of pure, final terror, cut off abruptly by a sickening crunch of metal on rock, and then silence. A profound, heavy, listening silence that was worse than the scream itself. The dread wasn't just in my head anymore. It was a physical sensation, seeping into me from the old vinyl of the seats, through the steering wheel, into my hands. This wasn't just a recording. The emotions were real. The pain, the fear, the joy, they were imprinted here. I felt physically cold. I had to get out, just for a minute. Voices, moments. I passed the old Miller farm today and heard old man Miller yelling at his son, clear as day. Miller's been dead 20 years. This road, it remembers. He was driving the road regularly, listening, cataloging the memories he found. He was as fascinated as I had been. But then, the tone of the final entries changed. The neat cursive became a frantic, almost illegible scrawl. I pulled the car over onto the gravel shoulder, my hands shaking. The first few entries were about the car, about his love for driving. Then, the entries started to be about this road. I was out here last week, after a terrible fight with my wife. I was so angry, so full of rage. Today, I drove past the same spot, and I heard it. I heard myself. I heard my own words, my own anger, echoing back at me from the static. It took a piece of me. It recorded my pain, and now it plays it back. Any strong emotion, any peak of human experience, it gets imprinted. It feeds the hollow. I needed fresh air. I needed to escape the claustrophobic intimacy of these ghosts. Inside, beneath a stack of old gas receipts and a tire pressure gauge, was a small, leather-bound journal. It was my grandfather's. His name was embossed in faded gold on the cover. I killed the engine, and the silence was a relief. I sat there for a long time, just breathing. My eyes scanned the simple, primitive dashboard. The glove compartment. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe I was just looking for a distraction. A state highway that cuts through the old forest. The map calls it Route 9, but it feels older than that. There's a strange quality to the air here. The radio keeps picking up old signals, like echoes. I must be coming back this way. With trembling fingers, I opened it. The pages were filled with his neat, looping handwriting. October 12, 1971, started my rite of passage today. October 15, 1971, it's not echoes, it's the road. I've started calling it the hollow. It holds onto things. I flipped through the pages. The entries became more frequent, more obsessive. September 3, 1992, I was wrong. I was a fool. The road doesn't just play back. It records. It takes. The last entry was written on a page that was tear-stained and smudged.